In 2014, the community and staff worked through the branding process, and the plan was adopted in April of 2015. And really the benefits and the intent of doing this community branding plan was to have a clear and consistent public image, to have that cohesive image for the city and for the partner organizations, Medco, the Chamber, and Uptown. Creates a competitive advantage for us, and that it promotes economic development by having that cohesive identity, and it differentiates us from our peers. And so the branding development and marketing plan had a whole list of recommendations for implementation over several years, and we've been really working through those as a city. Many of those recommendations are also more suited for some of our partner organizations, and those are things that are goals of theirs. We had a brand leadership team to initially guide the implementation, and that was comprised of community leaders. We've almost fully transitioned over to the new brand identity. We just have a few loose ends left. This year we have new contracts for professional photography and videography, and we are about to post a job description to hire a part-time event coordinator. So those are some of the bigger things that we've really been able to accomplish in the last couple of years. In terms of the capital projects that were a part of this plan, there are a couple of really major ones, and one of them is the community-wide wayfinding program. That was a recommendation from the branding plan. We do have over $500,000 currently budgeted for that out of the 2009 local option sales tax, and so that'll be enough to hire a consultant and then do the initial phase one. If we're talking about gateway features, that would take additional funding in future years, but there's definitely the funding available now. It just has not been a project that has commenced yet.
When do we foresee that commencing? Because I hear all the time about we need wayfinding signs.
Sure. I mean, there's been discussion about it. We've got the streetscape happening with the Central Corridor and with the mixed-use project happening uptown. Do we want to wait until that's been completely finished before we come in with our wayfinding, or do we want to at least start some of the process now or the planning for it with a consultant? We don't have it on a work plan right now on the calendar, but if council wants us to move forward with that, that's something that we can build into our work plans.
What all does wayfinding include? I mean, can you define that for me?
Yeah, so it could be anything from signage, multimodal signage, so for drivers, for pedestrians, for bicyclists, separate signage for different areas. So Uptown would have its own distinct signage potentially, and then all the way up to gateway features. So you know those big monumental signs that Cedar Rapids has along the interstate, something like that, or maybe even a gateway like a bridge. It doesn't have to necessarily be the very entrance to the community by the jurisdictional boundaries. What our branding consultant told us is that make your gateway feature at the spot where you're really proud of, to say this is where you're entering Marion. Have that big feature right there.
Well, like Hiawatha has done, they have gateway features with the big stone entryway.
Well, many years ago when I was on the chamber board, they did some wayfinding signs, and Ryan has one in his conference room. That was the old one.
In downtown Cedar Rapids, you see wayfinding signs, that kind of point you in different directions for the different cultural things and whatever it is. So it's that kind of stuff, and I just hear it all the time. Like, I don't know how to get to Lowe Park. I don't know how to, or the Artway or whatever it is. We need wayfinding around town to get people to enjoy what we have to offer and all things we're working on. My question is, if the funding is there, and it's not just uptown. I mean, if it's for other parts of the city. I mean, is there pieces of it, or does it have to be all done at once? Can it be done in phases?
It can probably be done in phases. I think really the first step is to put an RFQ out there and hire a consultant to do the study for us and kind of identify what exactly needs to be done, where they would recommend putting some of those features, and then also doing the graphic design for us. And so that is something that could be done without having to do any install, kind of on the front end.
Yeah. I'd be in favor if the funding is there and it's set aside.
Okay.
Get a study done and start biting some of it off.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then the second big capital project recommendation that came out of the plan is the plaza. And so I know that there's been a lot of recent discussion on that, just because it's been contemplated as a part, or to be concurrently developed with the mixed-use library project. It was identified as one of the 4 top projects out of the Imagine Next initiative, but this is really something that the community has been talking about for over 3 years now, because these recommendations did come out in the spring of 2015. That one's a little bit more complicated because we don't have any funding mechanism yet for that particular project, but it is something that you will see on the worksheets for the CIP discussion for this current fiscal year. And we'll be talking later this afternoon about Imagine X, so we can delve more into the plaza discussion at that time. But
so is the companion meeting to this? Sorry. Is the companion meeting to this, that's like Monday the 30th, when we're going to talk about prioritizing what we've heard today, basically?
yeah, we really want to delve into that more. And then next week, you'll also be receiving the full packet of worksheets, like you did last year, on all of the projects that we have either active in the CIP, so there'll be updated worksheets, and then those things that were not funded last year that are still needs of the community, and then new things that have arisen, I guess, in the last year. So you'll have a pretty significant packet coming your way next week.
To be able to be ready for that last meeting.
Okay. And that's all I have for the community branding plan, unless anyone has questions.
I just have to say that I think that in my time on the council, the branding plan has been probably one of the most successful things we've done. It has really changed the perception of the community. It's just, I know there's a lot of, it wasn't an easy process, and there was a lot of disagreement on what we ended up with, but I think it has been one of the most successful things that we have done that has really created a different perception of the community.
And I'm going to take the public art master plan, because this is one that I don't know that we've done a really good job of keeping in front of people, but it's part of overall the Imaginate initiatives that were done for the community, and it really has a couple of different components to it. The plan took a look at what Marion was doing with public art and what we could do to further enhance our existing efforts with public art, but then also has a component to it that deals with urban design, basically what you can see from the street, and then plans for what we should do in the future for additional public art installations. And so it did focus a lot on recommendations for our park systems, recognizing that Lowe Park already had a sculpture trail under development. I would say that with that, we've done a good job in following the recommendations of the plan. Mike has a selection committee together and revamped the process for the sculptures out at Lowe. And what it really did was it changed, in my mind, the scale of the sculptures that we were doing out there. If you look at the earlier ones, they tended to be a little bit smaller in scale, sometimes a little bit further away from the trail. But after this initiative, I think it really encouraged that group and helped them to start thinking a little bit bigger, leading to some of the larger sculptures that we've now installed over the last couple of years. And the Urban Design Initiative really had some pretty strong recommendations about what we should do for implementing design standards for buildings in areas around the community. This is one I'd say we have not done as well at in bringing it forward. We put some interim design standards and things in place, and we're making efforts to get the permanent ones in there, but it really morphed from being beyond what they talked about with standards for what the buildings just should look like. This one didn't didn't really get into where they should be placed on the lots, what the form of the building should be, what the height of the building should be. So it wasn't as detailed as what we needed, particularly in the central corridor area. Some of the other plans, like the neighborhood plan at Indian Creek, have a pretty good handle on it. Certainly the design standards for the Marion Enterprise Center have a good handle on it. But it's still something, as I think the council has seen with Squaw Creek Crossing, in some ways we're still figuring out exactly how we should implement it and how far we can push on this to be still be realistic about providing opportunities in our market. So that piece of it is still a work in progress. Another component of it deals with installations of public art around the community. At the time this was prepared, it focused on opportunities along the central corridor, but it led directly into the Imagine Art initiative. That was a perfect tie-in for a lot of the recommendations that were put in here. And the creation of the ad hoc selection committee to select the sculptures and select the permanent installations that went into the Imagine Art project is really almost a direct derivative of what was proposed in the Imagine Art plan. The next piece for us to do would be to take that type of a selection process and make it permanent for other places around the community. As we develop, and I'm glad that we're following up on the heels of the gateway discussion, because the gateway discussion, for example, if you think about the central corridor, we're going to have 3 roundabouts, and the gateway can help us select some thematic designs, which then launches into, are we going to put art installations in them like we did with Cornhenge? Are we going to go more into just landscaping like we did with Almernette and Tower Terrace? You know, but we've hesitated to do anything with it or go out and do RFPs until we have that design theme and have that all together. So the gateway thing has been on our radar screen for a while, but we haven't really advanced it because it was hard to define the scope of it. Now, we have met with Cedar Rapids and gone through what they did for their branding initiative to look at what they felt worked and what they didn't think worked. So we have some guidelines of what we should do for doing our RFP. So I think if the council wants us to move ahead with that, we're in a better spot than we have been to be able to at least get it started and get it under process. The third piece that was a big piece of the Imagine Art plan is how do you fund public art? And this is a piece that the city council at the time wasn't supportive of implementing, but the plan actually recommended that we set aside a percentage on all city capital projects for public art. That would include building projects. So like with City Hall, the plan calls for setting 2% of your capital projects aside for a public art installation. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do that art installation in the building. You could set it aside into a fund and accumulate it over time to do then ultimately a larger project somewhere else. If you've got, whether you want to do additional sculptures out at Lowe, whether you want to put a capital improvement in the middle of a roundabout. We have historically done them as one-off projects like the one at 35th and Tower Terrace Road, where we develop a budget for that particular project, go out and put it out for proposals, make our selection, come back with council, but it has not been something that's been particularly set aside. Now, when I went through the economic development policy, there is a component of the economic development policy that has a set aside for art. Again, that's an outgrowth of this plan. This plan suggested that when we were looking at doing tax increment financing projects, that it should follow that same roadmap as the set aside for art in the capital improvements fund and use some of those funds for public art installations. So that mechanism is in there, and we do have legal authority then for the council at some point in the future to be able to come forward and do a public art projects in the boundaries of the TIF districts. The only caveat to it is that that's less flexible than the dollars would be just coming out of the CIP, because we have to spend the dollars from a TIF district in a TIF district. So if we do a project, say out on Tower Terrace West, and we elect that we're going to do a public art project out there, we can't take Tower Terrace West dollars and spend them in the central corridor. It has to stay in the Tower Terrace West district. The other system, if you're just doing it on a percentage basis, you can take those dollars and use them anywhere. So Again, I don't think it's something that we've done that great a job just keeping in front of you, but we have done pieces in other plans and other action plans in particular that are consistent with this. We have used the outline of what it developed for the Imagine Art project. Internally, we'd like to formalize that process because as we get through the plaza design and really look towards the update of the Uptown plan, expansions of the Uptown Artway will be contemplated, and it would be great to have that selection process in place and have that committee in place so that we know what we're going to do and how it's going to work when we get moving forward on that. If you think about it, some organizations, Lynn County has actually done a great job with their art program. After the flood, when they replaced a lot of their buildings, they did a set aside for art. So when you walk into some of the county buildings, there's hanging sculptures and pieces all over the place. They have not done what we've contemplated where, you've got art along your public roadways or things like that, but they've tended to make it applicable to their facilities.
I think it would be neat if we chose to do something like that where we're requiring the citizens, in essence, to kind of chip in toward the art as the city grows, doing that in concert if we decided to make the decision to have developers dedicate parkland space. It's kind of the same, we're all reaching higher, we're all in this together. Maybe the timing could work out.
Yep. And the way, I know that most of you weren't on council when the Cornhenge project came forward, but that one was really spurred by a gift from the family that was selling the land. They wanted to see something out there in that to commemorate the agricultural heritage of the area. And so when we did the request for proposals, we asked for ones that had kind of an agriculture themes, because Vaughn Farms had owned the property for, I think it was a century farm, and wanted to see something out there to commemorate that heritage. And that's how that project developed. It was a matching grant, not dollar for dollar, but they contributed, and then the city put the rest in.
I think this is a good time to probably move forward on some of that stuff and start to implement these things in terms of the public art and setting aside certain percentages and all that. Because I don't know. I think we'd have support up here. This is my personal view. We haven't really discussed it, but I think the community at this point would be supportive of it too. So.
Well, and I think what you're going to see, and the reason I really wanted to bring this one out is because when we bring our next round of urban renewal plan amendments to council, they are likely going to include components for public art installations in the TIF districts. Right now, Central Corridor has had several projects that have been brought forward, most notably Timberline, since that policy was adopted, and we've had several projects in the Collins Road Extension District that have been brought forward. So we want to give ourselves legal authority to do those projects and to be able to use tax increment financing funds to complete those. As we get closer and start to develop that thematic design around the Central Corridor, those two districts each have a piece of that street, so we'll have the opportunity there to get some of those projects done.
I'd really like to see us come up with a good plan for what to do with our roundabouts. I mean, the Cornhenge looks great. The other ones are kind of just sitting there a little bit idle, but Marion is obviously the leader in putting in roundabouts in Lynn County and a lot of eastern Iowa, so I think that would go a long ways for not only the art, but making those look a lot more attractive and more positive.
Serve a dual purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it'd be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Well, and Mike can tell you that
a lot of traffic in all those roundabouts. So.
And what Mike can tell you is with those roundabouts, they want to have something in the middle. It's an obstruction to headlights coming across the roundabouts, so having a sculpture or having landscaping that's above ground level, it makes them more safe.
Maybe we could put a caboose in one of them.
Or a steam engine.
Train.
That woke Paul up. There you go.
We're going to get that done in that's 100 yards from the original roundhouse.
That's 100 yards?
I think that brings us up to you, Mike.
Yeah,
I think the master parks plan is next.
I did not make it through this one. I go 200 pages. How's he going to condense this?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest one, isn't it? The master. It's the thickest one up here. In the stack
Bear with
here.
me.
Does that mean it's the most important one, Mike?
Depends on who you're talking to. Yeah, it's 225 pages,
Yeah.
the master plan is. Basically, just a little background on it. The master plan for the Parks and Recreation Department was something that I had brought forward to Lon when I took over as the director. It was always kind of a concern of mine is, we really didn't have a roadmap for the department, to help set it. Everything was kind of, what do Mike and Rich want to do? And so, it was one of those things that I thought was important to do. It is the first in-depth overall park system master plan for the city of Marion. We hired a project consultant that was Confluence of Cedar Rapids that we brought on board. They had office in Cedar Rapids and Kansas City, so we utilized both staff from both to do it. Had some consultants, a company called Pros Consulting that did our statistical valid surveys for us. And then we used Water Edge Aquatics that helped us with the aquatic study within the plan. It was a year-long process. We actually started it in 2015, finished in 2016. We had a steering committee of 17 members on the steering committee. We had 3 subcommittees that were formed as part of the process. Those subcommittees looked at recreation and facilities. Aquatics was a subcommittee. And then we also had a subcommittee that looked at natural resources as part of the overall process. The plan is made up of 6 sections, and it basically looked at all facets of the department, from the top all the way down. The plan includes a facilities assessment, the aquatics study. Now, the aquatic study that we did as part of the master plan, that's like a 50,000-foot view of aquatics. So didn't get really in depth, but did help us set, to some of the things that we actually have in action today. We did 2 public input sessions as part of it, and within the plan we'll talk about the big ideas in a little bit. We actually had really good attendance. We talk about attendance for some of our public outreach sessions that we do. We had about 150 people attend the 2 sessions, so we thought that was really good. Talked about the survey that we did. That reached or touched 450 households, and basically that survey kept going, because we'd reach out, we wouldn't get response. We would keep responding until we hit that threshold of 450 households as part of the survey that we did when we were putting together the plan. We looked at coverage areas. We looked at benchmarking with other communities within the plan, just to kind of set that benchmark of where we were at compared to other comparable cities. We looked at our budgeting. We looked at cost recovery as part of it, and then also incorporated a look at our staffing and our staffing needs within the plan. We did kind of updated and revised our mission and vision statement, and I'm going to correlate some of the things I talked about to the pages in the plan because it is so large. So on page 7 and 8, we had our mission and vision statement and within the plan, and just some bullets from that. In the mission statement was to enrich lives through recreation and education, and then also to encourage health and active lifestyles. Those are just a couple bullets from the mission. And then in the vision was that every person has unlimited access to high-quality recreational programs, and then also the ability to access high-quality parks that also enhance and protect the environment. And those were the things that we identified within the steering committee and our mission and our vision statements as part of the plan. Section 2 of the plan basically looked at the park system needs. We looked at a facility assessment, starts on page 12 of the plan. We have a map on page 13 that identifies existing and future parks within there, so that's all identified within the plan. And each park in the system was evaluated and ranked, and the rankings are excellent, good, and poor. And there's a plus, a 0, or a minus associated with those rankings within the plan. And then the facility needs portion, that starts on page 15, and some of the things within that facilities needs, we looked at, and Tom spoke a little bit about this earlier, in that trail connectivity in parks, and so we called that out within the plan. One of the things was to create an individual identity for our parks. That was something that the community talked about when we were doing our outreach. It's something that steering committee we looked at too. And a couple of the most recent parks and that individual identity that you can start seeing that we're pulling from the plan. Waldo's Rock Park is a really good example of that, and trying to create its own identity for a park. The Rock helped us with that, but then to do some things different, we kind of were in a cookie cutter pattern or some of the things that we were doing. So to be able to incorporate a little bit different design in the pavilion. One of the things too from the plan is that we incorporate a loop trail within our parks, just not have a trail that runs through a park, but actually to put a loop trail within the park. So Lowe Park, our Waldo's is a good example of that. Improvements to Lowe Park also is a way to look at those things being incorporated too. When we look at identity of a park, we try and incorporate, bringing what's over at the Arts Environment Center over into the next phase of the park, kind of being consistent in the architectural design. I know we had the discussion earlier with the next phase and the restroom. There's some questions about the cost and those type of things. Well, a lot of that derives from the plan, and that the public wants to see those higher standards into the design, and those are things that we're incorporating out of the plan into designs, things that we're doing now. A little bit when we were doing the parking lot and we expanded the trail system, trying to create within Lowe Park more of a loop type of trail system. That all derives from this plan, pulling items out of the plan for that, just to give you some of the things that are actually happening right now associated with the plan. Those are just a couple of examples. Mike talked earlier about the need for accessibility, not only with our sidewalks, but facilities within the plan. I think one of the things within the plan that we talk about, and that's actually an audit of our ADA requirements and what we need within the park system. I'll take that farther. All of our city facilities, and we have a lot of those spread out across that. Actually, we should probably be looking at doing a full audit of the system. As we do improvements in the park system, we bring those up to ADA standards, but I think there's also the opportunity that we really look and being more proactive, and we really look at doing a full audit of facilities and those type of things just to see where we're at, so we can look to the future what we do really need to do as far as funding to get us in full compliance on some of those ADA compliance issues. Talked a little bit about the restroom out at Lowe Park. One of the other things in the needs with the amenities that people want to see were those upscale restrooms, drinking fountains, those type of things, et cetera, within the parks, which we're starting to see and we're starting to implement into the park system. One of the big things that was talked about and we have within the plan is to identify the need for a recreation center. Okay? I think everyone understands that with a population of almost 40,000 and lacking a good, high-quality rec center is something that we really need to move forward to. We feel that we're going to achieve that overall with our partnership with the Y, and that'll bring that together with both the Parks and Rec Department, the city, and the Y, and I think that'll be that facility that we're lacking on the recreation side, the Parks and Recreation side of the city. The aquatic center, you know, that's kind of come to light recently, the need for that aquatic center. Not going to go into a whole lot of detail of that because it's just kind of something that's in the queue already. Ball fields, I know that Project Meadows is kind of the buzz right now, but within the plan and within the study, you have Project Meadows, but we are still lacking in that need for recreational programming fields within the system. Again, I'll go back to, with a population of almost reaching 40,000, take baseball for instance, you know, Starry Ball Fields has served us well for the better part of 50 years. But we're outgrowing that. That's 3 fields over there, and there are some issues and concerns that come up with that. So we do need to, and Lowe helps us out a little bit with that and the fields that we have out there. But there is going to be a time where we do need to start looking at another sports complex associated with not only boys baseball, but the Peg Pierce facility and its side, it's small in scope, and we're going to have to look at increasing that too. So we talk about those items within the plans and within the needs assessment also. The next thing that we go into within the plan, and that talks about our level of service, and that's on pages 17 through 21. And that's where we get into looking at recommended national standards. And those are set by the National Recreation and Parks Association. So we try to look at those standards when we're doing things within the assessment. And basically, one of the things we talk about park acreage, and the standard is 10 acres of park space for every 1,000 residents in a community. So when you look at those, we're actually probably short overall, and when this study was done, probably a need for another 80 acres of park space. One of the things that we talk about in the plan with our overall acreage of around 600 in the park system total, we have a managed acreage of a little over 400. So we're short in overall acreage, but we're at a higher level in actually managed park ground though. So we're doing good overall in that category because the amount of acreage that we actually manage and we can use is higher than the average. But overall acreage, we're still a little short. So I don't want to confuse everybody, but that's kind of where we're at. We've got a large amount of acreage, but we're doing good on the amount that is actually used by the public, if you will.
Does the 600 acres, does that count the woods, the woodlands?
That will include Falk Woods, so you
Falkwood.
have 100 acres right there with Falks as part
That
of it.
includes that? Okay. I've always wondered if it includes that or not.
It does include that, and it also includes, we have acreage within the park system that somewhat is just green space that gets wrapped into that overall total. So we had some FEMA buyouts, and we have some areas down along Indian Creek and stuff. I mean, it's managed and it's cared for. It's mowed on a weekly basis, those type of things that are included, and there's some passive recreational opportunities that take place in those areas, but we do include that in the overall acreage.
It's not really park space. I mean, it's just green space.
It's green space under the Parks and Rec umbrella, if you will. Some of those areas we do use for soccer practices. Those type of things take place in those areas.
Would you recommend that if we were to try to bring ourselves up to that standard, that we include more passive then, since we already have a high level, we exceed actually the recommendations for maintained? Or it just depends on land, where we're looking and that kind of
I think it depends on on the location of where that's at, whether it's that passive or active. I think that if we look, kind of is going to segue into something here anyway. And if you look at the map of our coverage area that was done as part of the plan, this is just kind of identifies, and this is on page 19 of the overall plan. It kind of shows our service areas and our service gaps that we have. And so when you look at this, and Tom talks about the neighborhood at Indian Creek, it's pretty evident within the service areas that when we get over on the east side of town and northeast side of town, those are really the areas that we have, that we're going to see those gaps as the community builds out. So when we kind of talk about passive and active, you have, when you look at the neighborhood plan, you have actually a combination of both those active parks with more of a town square type of setting, and then with the larger parcel, that was more of a passive type of green space park setting. Not to say that you couldn't hold events and those type of things, but it really wasn't the intent was not in that plan to really build that out, but to have that more passive. So it's kind of, I guess, how I can answer that question a little bit. When we look at that, that gets us closer on that gap, just that one parcel out there. One thing that, and when we were talking about parks and what donated parks and those type of things, one that I hadn't thought about, we will have a parcel out here in the future off of Fernal Road that was part of the Dostal family farm. Linmar is going to eventually, they bought some ground out there too for a school in the future. The water department also purchased ground for a future water plant out there in that area. And then the Dostal family actually donated some acreage for future park ground out there too. So there is, we do have the identifying the future park out there to help service this unserviced area at this time. But this area up in here actually to me is the most concerning at this time as we start building out and being able to serve. I know there's always a lot of discussion about over on the south side of the community and what are we doing for the south side of the community. But if you actually look at this service map, our coverage on the south side of the community actually is relatively good. And I think the map helps to identify that within the plan.
Is that on line somewhere too?
This is on the city website. The whole
Okay,
master plan is
that'd
on
be a
the
good one to
website.
point to if we get that question,
Yep.
It's funny though, our parks tend to be like, they're very linear, like right up the middle. We don't have
we
much
tried
on
to
the
be
edges,
central
but-
or something.
Yeah.
And that kind of, and it kind of goes back to a little bit, a lot of these parks that we have existing, have been in the system 40, 50 years, and not always the best piece of parcel of ground to build on, and some of that is that cause and effect, if you will.
Always.
No, that's a $1 million question.
Excuse me. Then also within that needs assessment in page 21, we talk about the need for those neighborhood community parks, and then I talk about that overall 80 acres of parks ground and the ball fields. The outdoor pool that we currently have meets the standards currently. The downside of meeting that standard is that it's the traditional lap pool that we have, and it just doesn't have the amenities of an aquatic center or that water park style of water features. So, and then one of the other things was that kind of stood out was a dog park, which always comes up for discussion of that need for the community. We're fortunate that the County Squaw Creek Park right now does help to service the community. But I do believe that we will need to start thinking in the future about dog park on the north side of the community somewhere to service that expanding area. And then we talked a little bit about the rec center. I think one thing that with the rec center and the partnership between the YMCA and the city, the plan called out a need for 60,000 square foot. We're looking at a YMCA at about 66,000 square foot right now. When we pull in the partnership aspect of it, and we're going to be able to incorporate our facilities at Lowe Park, our ball fields into this partnership, utilizing the Lowe Park Arts and Environment Center for some of our programming that we put. That gives us a total of around 82,000 square foot of space, which helps to get us back to what we originally were trying to do with a new Y rec center combo. So it gets us a little bit closer to the overall square footage that we were looking for. We still have some concern in that overall square footage for gym space, but when you pull the two together, based on those national standards, it does help us get a little bit closer to where we need to be overall.
In that Imagine Next project that just happened, was a dog park identified? I know we took the top 4, but were any things that you're talking about adding identified by the public, since we got a lot of input on that?
I can't remember I know it wasn't in the top part, how deep embedded in there it was. I don't remember, to be honest with you.
No?
I know that dog park came up in our surveys instead of in the park plan, though.
Okay.
I'm not sure that would come up as strong because of the facility out there at Squaw Creek, that
We'll
the
feel
county
like there's
has.
already
Oh,
a-
yeah.
yeah.
So they feel there's
we
something there
already
that's
have that.
accessible and close
Gotcha.
by.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of people wouldn't think about that.
Okay, I'm going to keep trying to move on here. I knew I was going to be up against my time when I started. But anyway, the next portion was on page 23, and that talks about the benchmarking. And we benchmarked against Ankeny, Coralville, West Des Moines, Dubuque, and Urbandale. And the reason that we looked at these cities when we were looking at benchmarking is because they had a lot of things that were similar to Marion. They were growing communities. They were adjacent to larger metropolitan areas. So we used those to help with our benchmarking, and those were the reasons. Excuse me. We already talked about acreage in those, so I'm going to move on here. Next part, when we were benchmarking on page 26 and 27, we looked at operating budget and cost recovery. When we looked at that, Marion overall, we ranked a little low in operating expenditures per capita, but our overall cost recovery, we were the lowest at 24%. So that's something that we've been looking at and trying to see what we can do to change some of those. And one of the things that I think will help us, and again, it's going to be a partnership, and that's when we can expand our programming and have a rec center Y/Y to help with some of that overall. Now that one might be somewhat invisible how that looks on the back end of that when we do the partnership and we're working through some of those. But I think overall that'll help us considerably on overall cost recovery in our programming. We talk about our budget, and basically overall our operating budget is 100% general fund. We look at compared to our operating expenditures were low compared to the benchmark cities. Capital projects funds, we looked at 85% of our capital project funds are 85% loss, 5% geo bonds, and 5% grants, and 5% gifts is how that basically breaks down. There's a need for that dedicated funding for park improvement projects. And this kind of ties together with that dedicated parkland conversation a little bit. Not only do we have that need for that dedicated parkland, but also something that we identified in the plan was a dedicated funding source for park improvements. History overall, before local option sales tax, it was very, very hard to get park improvement projects in the queue in the CIP. When I came over to the Parks and Rec Department, we probably had somewhere around 65 to 70 capital improvement projects in the CIP that were unfunded. At that time, we were ranked against everything, and parks projects always fell to the bottom. With the lost funding coming online to the city, that helped us out greatly. We were actually with a percentage of those funds dedicated to park projects. We were able to start moving the needle on park improvement projects. One of the things within the plan that we talked about is having that dedicated stream of funding for park projects, not knowing when local option, whether it will be renewed, whether it will be sunsetted, but to have that dedicated stream that continues. One of the things within our survey was that we asked that question to our citizens, and out of that survey came that our citizens would want to take a look at having some dedicated funding for park improvement projects. And I think that's something that at some time we'll need to look at, how we incorporate that and have that funding stream that continues into the future. But it was one of the things that was identified within the plan. We looked at staffing as part of it, and when we look at overall staffing, if we concentrate solely on the Parks and Rec Department, benchmarked against the other cities, we actually look pretty good. We're even with those. Where it kind of skews a little bit is when we're just looking at activities associated in Parks and Rec. When you start adding it in a lot of the other things that we are doing today, that pushes our numbers a little bit behind. When we start incorporating things like right-of-way mowing, city facility maintenance, whether that be outside, whether it be inside, that starts pulling that staff away from their main core duties in the Park and Rec system. So that's just one thing when we look at right now, I think we're good, and that's why, in the budgeting process, asking for some permanent part-time employees, those type of position, is to help us cover that gap a little bit. So we've added things since the study was done. Some of the workload of the department has increased, and so the numbers look like we're good, but there are some other things that we're pulling in that we're doing that makes that a little skewed in that overall number. So I just wanted to point that out too. When we get into in section 3, we talk about the big ideas, and there's icons on page 32 that identify the following things: economics, connections, programming, visibility, sustainability, health, and population. And then these icons will be transformed or transferred over into the implementation matrix as part of the overall program that we have within the plan. Excuse me. When we, excuse me, there were some financial recommendations associated with the plan. Talked a little bit about cost recovery. There's more information on page 33. It basically sets a city or an overall department goal of 50% by 2025. I think that's a realistic goal as we look at what we're looking at as far as our pricing of programming, facility usage, those type of things. What we can do for increased programming and things that we're doing. So that's a goal that we have set. We're actually starting the process this year as one of our departmental criteria that we want to complete this year, start looking at the cost recovery for our recreation division and come up with some standards for that, one of the goals that we have set for the department for this year. One of the things in the plan was also that we'd want to invest 2 to 4% of the current value of the park system. What that, kind of high-level numbers, that equates to about $400,000 annually if you wanted to do the math on that. We're not too far off of that right now, actually, with our funding out of local option sales tax. And then one of the next things on page 35 that we talked about within the plan a little bit was streetscaping, and that kind of goes across with some of the things that Tom talked about. So there are overlaps within the programs. We talk about dedicated landscape easement included in the street plans. Called that out. The networking of the linear parks was also called out. And then we talked a little bit about those the rural cross sections just recently, and to provide a more natural roadway. And Tom's right, those rural cross sections and how we design those, and if we're going to keep those, and Mike kind of is looking at this study, can we incorporate those natural aspects with prairie grass, pollinators, those type of things, into those rural cross sections right away. So we do identify with that even in the park system master plan. We talked about park identity. We just talked about wayfinding. We also talked about wayfinding within this plan. So again, things cross over and the need for those, so they're identified within the parks plan too. Site furnishings within the plan, they're called out, and that's when we look at bike fix-it station, drinking fountain, dog drinking fountains, what type of benches, everything associated with it, we have identified within the plan. And then those furnishings, and we talked about the upgrades of restrooms, those type of things. That's, again, referencing back to those things that are in the plan. And then the natural resources, they come up, best stormwater practices in our park system, pollinator projects that we're doing. Dry Creek comes up, trout stocking within that. That pulls back that whole idea of Imagine Next, and Indian Creek improvements and all those things. We've already started that identity within this plan also. So you can see that there's some synergy there, if you will, that what's coming out of Imagine Next, what we have in the park system master plan, those things are identified, and I think that somewhat Imagine Next, Imagine 8, together with the plan starts validating a lot of things that we're doing overall. So those are good things to see coming out of Imagine Next. We talk about goals on page 37 of the plan. We start talking about goals, and I'm not going to go into all those. They're all identified within there are things that we'd like to do. Park improvements, those are identified from page 38 to 43. Because we looked at the individual parks within the system. They're all identified in things that we can do as far as park improvement projects. That eventually ties back into CIP as we bring those forward. We looked at programming and recommendations, and I'm not going to go through all those with you, but you can look at those. Be more than happy to talk to you about those on a one-on-one basis if you'd like. But there's a lot of things associated with health and wellness associated in those things that are incorporated in there when we look at programming. Expanding the senior programming, that's identified. We're working on some of those goals right now, bringing back senior meals, what we're doing with programming associated with that. That all ties back into the plan also. We identified with CIP, and I gotta be honest with you, the CIP within the plan, it's moving so fast. A lot of the information is already dated within the plan, and there's new things already evolving. But we did have a portion of the overall master plan that did talk about the CIP. Section 4 is all operations and maintenance, and I'm not really going to go into detail there. There's a lot of content within that. But we do have a full section for operations and maintenance. we identify with funding and revenues, or if you go to page 56 and 57, it's going to talk about funding and revenues within the plan, and that's all scheduled out, outlined within the plan also. Section 5, that gets into that implementation matrix, and that pulls back the icons, and it sets parameters in that matrix, looks at, year 1 to 3 and then out, and what some of those goals are within that matrix, and that's all I identified within that. And actually, we're using that as a reference now on what we can do, and we're starting to implement those things within the plan, within that matrix. So again, a lot of it's a guide, helps us, to move the department forward within there. A lot of operations and management recommendations within the plan. Page 76, 77 within the plan identifies a lot of those. Too many to talk about today that are listed in there. Again, a lot of things within the plan. If you'd like to meet and talk about one-on-one, I'd be more than happy to. And then the last is section 6, which is the appendix, and just kind of sets the overall framework, everything, the analysis, the trends that are in there. Core programming is identified. Program funding, again, talks again about cost recovery within that section. We also talk about program standards, performance management within the plan, financial review. We have a financial review provided. And then we also get into, towards the end of the plan, we get into that aquatics programming and everything associated with that. And if you look at it, and we're going to talk a lot about aquatics in the future, so I'm not going to go into it in detail today, but that does, at a high level, it talks about new water park, aquatics, existing facility, location, building over the existing, whether that would work or not, and then some costs associated with the new aquatic center. So I don't think we need to go into that today because we're going to be talking a lot about it in the future. But it is identified in the plan, and one of the things was to do that aquatic study. And so we have that funded in CIP, and we'll be starting that this fall. And then finally, towards the end, you'll see a section from page 197 to 225 that basically talks about all the public input and the parks amenities throughout that section. We talk about that passive and active parks in that section, and then again, within that section, it provides all the information associated with the public input and compiles that into that section. It's a big plan.
Very big plan.
And I apologize. It is a little hard to try to cover all of it.
No, it's
in a
fine.
short
It's very
period of
important.
time.
And actually, this department is very central to what makes Marion attractive to people and quality of life and all of that. So it's very important. One thing that I know we're behind, but for me, and I think for all of us, could you talk a little bit about the Parks Board, what their role is, what's their discretion on decision making, that kind of stuff? Because they're there and they do a lot of stuff, but we never really interact with them much. We don't. And
I actually was gonna talk about Park Board, Arts Council, and a couple other things too, and we can do that right now. That's fine.
If you've already got it in your.
No, that's fine. We'll start with Park Board, and again, I think everyone understands that the Park Board is appointed, committee by the City Council, and basically there is a little bit of separation in duties from the City Council, and those are all outlined and approved by City Council what their authority is, and basically, function of the Park Board, is to drive those improvements, whether it be fiscal improvement to the park, whether it be recreational programming, setting fees, those type of things for the park system, bringing recommendations back to the City Council on those big capital improvement projects, and then also They are that body that basically helps to steer, what we do associated with the plan and the park system moving it forward. It's a real, and then also, they're that liaison to the public to bring things forward versus, to the city council, they can come to a park board meeting with their ideas, things for improvements to the park. And then a lot of times those ideas will make it forward to the city council to take action on,
So when people come to us with questions or suggestions about parks, we can suggest to them they go to the park board meeting.
That would definitely be the direction that I would like
Okay.
The city council would be, because basically that is their function. Those things can come to the city council, and then I would just, like those referred to the park board for discussion. And then they would probably, if it's something that's not budgeted and we need to discuss, then that comes back to the city council for discussion.
Okay.
Is how that process works. Again, they do have some budgeting authority. Once that's identified, once the budget is set by the city council, then it's at the park board level then. So let's say that we're replacing a piece of equipment within the park system. Once you have budgeted, that does not come back to the city council. The park board has the authority to approve that purchase then. If it's a non-budgeted item or it's exceeding the budget amount, then they will make a recommendation, and that comes back to you for approval. So that's kind of how
That's important to understand.
that works. Okay. Real quick, just one of the things, and because we're doing a lot with it, is the Lowe Park Master Plan. And I just wanted to really quick, just on the Lowe Park Master Plan, the things that we're doing out at the park today and in the future are all coming from this plan. And I think everyone has seen this picture before of the overall plan. The original plan for Lowe Park at the time the park was dedicated by the Lowe family. The original plan was done, I believe it was 99 or 2000. And then we updated the plan in 2011. Updating the plan was driven by Imagine8 and the amphitheater project. And where could we put that amphitheater? It ended up, out of all the park ground that we have in the system, that Lowe Park would be the place for that. And so that's why we updated the master plan. We did have to do a little changing to it. Originally, the amphitheater was going to be more over towards the pond in this area. We did a study on another pond in this area, and it just wouldn't work. We were kind of water starved in the area, so we could not add another pond. And then due to costs associated with the amphitheater infrastructure and trying to get the infrastructure down there, it was really driving the cost of the overall project up. So we made a decision to move the amphitheater up by where the Arts and Environment Center will. And actually, I think that was a good move, and it's a great location for it. But as you can see within the plan, calls for neighborhood parks, and actually 2 neighborhood parks within the plan, one south and one north. And we're working on that with Irish Drive coming in the park. We're working on that south side now within the plan. So, real quickly, within the plan, and all these things are going to be things that will be brought back, future CIP, current CIP that we're working on when we talk about current south end development, west end development. All those things are driven by this master plan. So we have parking lot, roadways, restored prairie, woodlot restorations. We've got the sports complexes, and it's built, but there's always improvements. There's some trail expansion that needs to be done as part of the master plan. Pavilions and shelters, we're working on that in one portion, but they're called out in other portions of the park. Greenhouse expansion and the scope of that getting larger. Community gardens, which we have, and we keep expanding those. We're working on the art trail, which we're going to talk about really quick in a second. There was a mediation area called out, and then improvements to the park entry. So all those things that we're doing, and Southside development, we're talking about improvements in landscaping as we're coming in. Everything associated is all driven by that plan. So just one of those overlaying plans.
So where you show the pond in the middle, Mike,
Yep.
just below that, is that additional parking right there?
This one?
Yeah, just to your, yeah, just below there. Is that
This
additional
here?
parking? No, right where you were before.
There. Okay.
Oh, that was where the old amphitheater.
This was the original site of
That is the original
where
amphitheater
the
site.
amphitheater
Oh,
was
I
going to
follow.
go. And then we moved it to here.
Okay.
This is where the new playground area is going to go. This went away. This is all prairie grass now. This whole area is now in prairie grass pollinators.
So is there plans for any more parking out in this area?
We have the 200 stall parking lot that you see here. This is the new 200 stall parking lot that we built. There's another 20 stall. The parking lot is built, 20 stalls here. This is built, the 200 here. Then over here, we're going to build another parking lot to help service the sports complex ball field areas. That's in another CIP project in West End Development where that next parking lot comes in.
I still see when there's events out there, there's always sometimes a big shortage of parking.
It is. I think you have to,
Always gonna be
the parking issues that we have at Lowe Park now are somewhat, it's a great problem to have because of the size that people that were drawing to the events. When the amphitheater was built, it was built as an event center for 800 to about 1,200 people attending a performance. We've well exceeded that. We're upwards of 2, 3, sometimes we're even getting close to 5,000 people. So we weren't necessarily designed for that. I think if we were going to look at extending parking, we probably would look at the area over here. We have grass parking, which is identified within the plan, but we could probably move some of that parking, incorporate some parking, more parking to the south if we were going to do that.
For those 2 times we needed.
Mike, is the pond on the east end, is that still in the plan?
This is still in the plans.
Okay.
Yeah, that's still planned, and we think we can service that with the drainage area that we have to build that in the future.
That'd be nice to have that, yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing, while Mike kind of regroups a little bit, I'd like to bring up with this park is this park was a donation from the Lowe family. And, sometimes you might hear people talking about, well, that's not what George Lowe would have wanted. When we adopted this plan, any changes that we've made to the major design of it have been in consultation with the surviving members of the Lowe family. We're very sensitive to the fact that this was a donation. The surviving members still live out there. Anytime we've made revisions to it, it has been with their full support. So if you hear something like that, that's just basically a smokescreen for I don't like this, because anything that we've done has had their wholehearted and I would say enthusiastic blessings.
And I know Mike hears from them all the time, that he's in constant communication with them, and I hear from them all the time, and all I hear is how wonderful everything is and how pleased they are with how this park is being developed and used by the public. I've never gotten any sense that they have any reservation about what's being done, and they've been part of the planning for much of it.
Oh yeah, and Lon's right. There has not been one phase of development out at Lowe Park that we haven't talked to the family before we move that next phase forward, and always very supportive. Katie Lowe Lancaster sits on our Park Foundation board, and they're very involved with development of Lowe Park and the different phases the Park Foundation has. So, and Alice was also on the Park Foundation board. So they see everything that happens associated with Lowe Park and the development out there. I have no concerns about that. The next thing real quick that I wanted to talk to you about, and this gets kind of back to the Master Arts Plan, and kind of a subset of that is the Lowe Park Art Plan. And when we were looking at starting to develop the art trail out there, we started with some small pieces, And to keep that process going, I referenced I started looking at that master arts plan and looking at what we were doing with Arts Council, those type of things, and thought, we need to take a pause here, look at that overall art plan and figure out how we incorporate some of those components and things within that into the art sculpture trail and how we're going through that process. So we took a little bit of a pause, and working with Martin Gardner, we came up with a plan for the Art Council to utilize specific to the development of the art sculpture trail at Lowe Park. And so basically, the plan has 4 sections. The first section within that plan talks about the process, instructions, and then it goes into a section on visioning, planning, and building. And then there are 8 steps within that to guide the selection and installation of art at Lowe Park. And basically just really, it flows really easy in those 8 steps. It talks about the Arts Council determines the need for new art. We reference and review the public art plan that Lon talked about. And there's a section within that plan, like Lon talked about, specific to Lowe Park. So we go back and we reference that, and we use some of that information as part of the process. There's a step to determine the location of the art within the park. There's a step to determine the targeted budget and timeline for it. There's a section to help us determine that form and style of the piece that's selected. And there's a reference section within the plan for each one of these steps that the Arts Council or a subcommittee assigned by the Arts Council that uses this as a guide to help them develop the project. There's a section about assembling a team to work on the project, whether it's the subcommittee of the Arts Council, city staff, the artist, engineering, whatever it takes, architect. So there's a section that looks at how do you build that team to get that piece of art in place. And then there's a final step that's how do you promote that art out after you have that installation done. So our first 2 pieces that we used in implementing this plan, Prairie Revival last year, and then also everybody, Disappearing Culture, which is the bison. We used this plan to procure those 2 pieces, the artist, and then to go through the process. I think it worked very well. And the last piece was, how do we get out to the public of what we did? And basically, we did a full-blown reception and everything associated with it. So I just wanted that this plan is there. We talk about the Arts Council, the function of the Arts Council. Art Council basically, all volunteers, again, appointed by the City Council, working not only with just art, sculpture art, it's also in programming, the Picnic on the Prairies, those type of things. They help to drive over the overall conversation about art in the community. I think overall there is a need to embrace the master art plan more than what we have in the past. And I think there's an opportunity there to utilize the Art Council a little bit more. It seems like we've been somewhat narrow-minded in looking at more just a Lowe Park and not getting out a little bit farther in our reaches. And I think we can use them, and I encourage this City Council to encourage your Arts Council to embrace that plan and start, as we start looking at new artwork and art pieces and sculptures and things, whether it be in a building or out in a public space, that we utilize that plan and we utilize our Art Council a little bit more in that process.
Weren't they involved in the Artway project?
To some extent. Yeah. To some extent, we did have members that did have some input associated with that.
I agree. I think that's very important. And we should.
Notice you have a swan, Mike.
I do.
A swan? You have a swan in the
Rock Park.
in the pond?
Oh, a real one?
Real one.
Oh, that's nice.
I'll have to take your word for it, Paul.
Well,
So that's a real quick overview of the art plan, the sculpture trail at Lowe. This does tie back to CIP because we're continually asking for funding in CIP to keep working on that sculpture trail project at Lowe Park. But I think it's important that you know that that plan is there and in place.
I think it's one of those things that sets us apart from other cities, and it's really been great. I personally would want to see the aquatic center discussion advanced, because if there's one thing in our great park system that we hear that I hear more and more disgruntled comments about, it's the pool. That's probably the one thing that people are commenting on, and I just like to see us advance that discussion. It's time.
Again, I think
it's timely.
Yeah, I think with that is to get the survey done, see where we're at with, have some recommendations come out of that survey, and then that next step will be starting to look at what we're going to do for location, and that survey will drive a lot of that, and then looking at acquiring the property, those type of things, and then start to build up that fund.
That's going to take a long time. I mean, we're already not going to be doing this in the immediate future with all that to do. So, we should get started. Yep. Because like I said, people love everything about our city. There's this one thing they're complaining about, it's the pool.
Yeah.
So
the one thing, though, I will say about the existing pool, overall, I know we've had some issues with it and those type of things, but it is that traditional pool. It does function very well for that. There are some maintenance things, but overall, at a pool that's starting to getting closer to that 40 years of age, and it has aged actually very well compared to a lot of pools of similar age.
Yeah.
So it's been, overall well maintained.
Not arguing against that at all.
I know that.
It's true. That. But I think what people expect from a city like Marion these days, a city that's so progressive, that's just setting the trend on everything, setting the bar for all the other cities. I think they expect to see us have a better aquatic center. And, it's in our plans. That's what I keep saying. We're working on it.
Yeah, lots of other towns have better centers now.
Right. So, it's just perception. People expect us to have something better for them.
Yep.
So, but
and it's not
you do a wonderful job, Mike. I'm not at all diminishing what you do.
There's a lot of people around me that help to make our park and rec system go.
Absolutely.
From the city council to the park board to our to our arts council to our friends of the parks to our friends of the cemetery, which you wouldn't get into, to all the departments that help support everything we do, from the public service department, engineering, everybody. Everybody helps to make everything that we do happen. It is a big team here. To drive that, and I think the community sees that, and they're very supportive of it overall. I had one plan that I didn't have on my list that I just want to make because it's been in the news lately about Cedar Rapids emerald ash borer and their aggressive removal of ash trees. Some of the council members probably aren't aware that we actually implemented an emerald ash borer readiness plan for the city of Marion back in 2014, I believe, is when we put that plan together. So just wanted the new city council members to know we have a plan in place. We're actually with having Mike on as a Simprich as our city arborist now. We're probably going to do some updates to that plan, but we have a full readiness plan in place, and we remove annually. We're removing about 100 ash trees a year within the city. You just don't see it happening. It's just quietly happening. We have an injection program in place for doing injections to have some survivor ash trees within the community. Those are all based in that readiness plan, so there's a lot of activity already taking place associated with ash trees.
And I also always smile when I read in the paper about how Cedar Rapids is considering the tobacco-free parks, and they never mention that Marion's had nicotine-free parks for several years now. So. Okay.
And I apologize for taking way more time than I was allotted.
That's all right. It's important stuff. We'll just take it from Kesha. We'll just take it from Kesha's time.
Actually, your time's
We'll
up.
just deduct it from Kesha's time. No. Which is the second biggest plan up here.
So
just a little bit of background. In 2008, when we did Imagine 8, trails was one of the high-ranking, this is what we want for Marion. And then when Blue Zones came along, the Master Trails Plan was one of the initiatives in Blue Zones to get that done. So in 2013-14, we got adopted the Master Trails Plan. And what this does is I have larger copies. There's copies of the plan online, there's copies of the updated map. And so in 2014, we adopted the Master Trails Plan. We'd had a previous, the Parks Department had done a previous Master Trails Plan. It was good, as far as laying out the framework for parks. I feel like this one took it a step further as far as kind of working on education, enforcement, encouragement, just looking at our trails and how do we think outside the box for just a trail in a park. This took it as far as identifying the larger sidewalks, the bike lanes, the sharrows, the bike boulevards, and just trying to make it a true network. And so we worked with Alta Planning and Design out of St. Louis to do this plan. And what we looked at is we looked at the volume of the streets or the daily traffic. We looked at the speeds on streets. We looked at what connectors were. Were we trying to connect schools, parks, public areas as well. And so when you look at this plan, it's kind of tough to see. Zooming in, you've got a couple different lines here. These should be purple. They printed out a little deeper than I wanted. And then you've got some blue lines, you've got some orange lines. Up here you've got green lines. So each one of those represents something different, a different way to get from point A to point B, whether or not you're on your bike. All of these would apply, the sharrows and the bike boulevards and the bike lanes don't necessarily apply to pedestrians. But so looking at this plan, this is something that touches kind of all the departments, as Mike was saying. This is something that when we implement trails, we understand any larger sidewalks, any trails through our Parks Department is going to maintain them. Talking about the painting on street, whether or not it's bike lanes, sharrows, bike boulevards, public service is going to be maintaining those. The painting is kind of an annual program, so it's not just as simple as the trail where you put it in and it's done. You just plow it. But that's an ongoing project as well. Some of the bigger hype that we've had about the trails is about $15 million towards trails in federal funds. And so when this plan was adopted in 2014, we had already had kind of the CMAR Trail or the Grantwood Trail, some funding for that under our belt, and we had started asking for funds for CMAR Trail. And so when this plan came on board, it gave us this, like I was talking about with the MPO, once you have your identified routes that you want, you can put them in the long-range plan. Then you can get them in the fiscally constrained, and that's your in, basically, to apply for federal funds on the metro level. And so in 2012, the MPO said we're going to take our $5 million. I talked about our $5 million, and it had been traditionally 80% of that $5 million, so $4 million every year they were able to allocate towards roads, and 20% of that, so $1 million, they were allocating towards trails. Well, in 2012, it was pretty Cedar Rapids weighted on the policy board, and so when the incoming council or incoming mayor Corbett had a strong will for trails, the MPO board switched to 80% towards trails. So $4 million every year for trails is a significant amount. And so basically I found the in and I just kept asking for funds. And so the CMAR Trail right now is estimated at $6.7 million. That is all 80/20, so 80% of that is federal funds. I mean, it's a significant amount for Marion, but considering what funds we're getting out of that. And if you don't know...
Leveraging our money.
So when we talk about the CMAR Trail, it's going to be tough to look on the map here, but right here is the uptown. So basically it comes west utilizing the old railroad right-of-way. It would be paving the trail through Thomas and Legion Park. When you get south of 100, it dips a little bit into Folkswoods Park. Again, Folkswoods Park is meant to be left alone. It's not meant to be your playgrounds. It's not meant to be your parking lots, your
preserve.
pavilions and whatnot. But the intent with this is to just touch on a part of Falks Woods. Get a taste for the woods. Maybe some educational signage. For further exploring. But going on into Cedar Rapids, and so this was the last chunk of the Seymour Trail that was yet to be funded. Cedar Rapids has their funding in place. They have yet to fully implement all of their phases, but they're working on it as well. And so this serves as downtown Cedar Rapids to uptown Marion. You don't have to take your life in your hands on First Avenue anymore. You don't have to ride the hills of, is it Rosedale? Getting down further south from Marion. It can get kind of hilly through there, but so Seymour Trail was our first trail that really looked at this plan and really used this plan as a funding mechanism. Next, we have the Indian Creek Trail, which spurs off from the Boyson Creek Trail, or Boyson Trail, follows Indian Creek up, crosses 10th, and up, and will end up by Tower Terrace Road. So Tower Terrace Road, when that's constructed, will have side paths on both sides. So you have your connectors there. We've naturally got the Grantwood Trail that is under construction right now. City paid for portions between 31st and 35th, and then 35th out to Highway 13 is actively under construction. Out at Highway 13, we had the underpass put in 2015. And so those are, that was one of those pieces. Why'd you build it? Well, we needed that, so that way when we get the trail through. And then another one that is significant, not necessarily one of those standalone trails that you get the warm fuzzies on, but the 10th Avenue side path connects Hy-Vee at 35th Street, would install side paths on both sides of 10th Avenue, clear over to Walmart. And so that is the Eagle View Drive, the stoplights right in front of Walmart. And so what that does is it provides not only connections back to the neighborhoods, because right now you can come down 44th Street and with sidewalks, and you just don't go anywhere. So, it allows that looping back into the neighborhoods, but then it also provides this huge transportation connection. This is where our bus stops are on significant portions as well. So this is great connection between
What
those
an
two.
improvement to that corridor too, I think.
Yes.
It's just going to be.
So the thing is, because they're federal funds, they're 4 years out. So that's something to think about when we're applying for federal funds. In this instance, we were able to get a significant amount of money. It's just the waiting game on getting those done. And they do have the federal strings attached to them. So it is the NEPA clearance, the environmental review, the endangered species, the wetlands, all the fun stuff that goes with that. So those are the trails that we have funds for. There's more trails identified on here, such as the Squaw Creek Trail, following Squaw Creek from 29th Avenue down, crosses the Grantwood Trail, and then connects into Squaw Creek Park. I think that could be a future partnership with Lynn County. They definitely want to emphasize the trails in Squaw Creek Park as well, and so I could see that coming in the future. So that's just the green space trails. That's a higher price trails. What I'm not mentioning is the Sharrows, the bike boulevards, the public service. When we implemented the plan, we started talking about what can we do for painting. Where do we have the width where we could have bike lanes in addition to just wide drive lanes? Where can we get painting in on South 11th Street? You'll notice the symbols. On Grand, you'll notice the symbols. They were rock stars last year, and the thought is to continue building that. So we're going to see some more bike lanes this year in addition to maintaining what we have. And then another thing that is used with this plan is Tower Terrace Road is a good example, or even, let's see here, we've got 35th Street and 35th Avenue, so you've got the water tower. And what you'll notice is you've got a light blue and a dark blue dash line. What that is the dark blue dash line is going to be your bike lanes, and your light blue dash lines are going to be your side paths, so your wide sidewalks, 8 foot to 10 foot wide. And so what that does is having it identified on this plan. So when Morris Wood came in to do Author's Edition on this southeast corner, we were able to work with them to dedicate the extra right-of-way. We've got bike lane on there, and we've got side path on one side of that street. And so having this plan allows us to go after federal funding. Having this plan allows us to work with our public service department to get a plan together of how we do our on-street accommodations. And then it helps us work with the developers as far as getting those trails in. It's not all developer funded. We don't just say, give us the extra right of way and put in the entire trail. We do pay for the oversizing just like we do with larger streets as well. But this is our way of getting our connectivity in there, and just being a progressive city. Any questions on the trails?
What's the date on that?
On this map, we adopted this last year. And so, yeah, out of this plan, the Master Trails Plan also recommended that there be a bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee. Will sits on it as a member of council. There's staff member on there. There's public health. There's MPO, LAMBA, Lynn Area Mountain Bike Association. They're great support. Lynn County Trails Association, they're trail advocates through and through. They also have a member on our board as well that I think it's a 12-member board that we work through all of these processes, and then talking through about, okay, we forgot to call out, a side path on this road, or we forgot to make the connection here. We amended this map last year, and you'll be seeing it either end of July or beginning of August to come back and add a few more sections on there. It's not an overall throw out the old plan, bring in a new. It's just adding these
Tweaking it.
further sections, so that way, again, with the development community, with grant getting, it allows us that in.
I'd have to say trails is one of the items that comes up a lot of times in conversations I have with people. And they kind of bring it up on their own, talking about how important it is to them, how important it is to the city. And they always compare Marion to Des Moines or some other areas that have really good trail systems. And so we keep moving in the right direction. So great effort, great job.
Yeah.
Very important.
Imagine 8, so like I said, back in 2008, 10, Imagine 8, people were really hungry. That was one of their major priorities. We got the plan in place. We started getting funding for trails. Again, that funding is out there. When Imagine X, when they just wrapped that up, trails was, again, one of the number one mentioned things. People are very hungry and excited for trails to get out there and to get from point A to point B and not have to always use the street to do it. It wasn't put in Imagine X just because we do have a significant amount of funding coming. That's not to say
We're
that
already
I'm
working on it. It's already a project that's in the works. So.
We just, some of it we can't spend yet, but other parts we're under design contracts for it. As you guys know, the bridges are part of the CMAR Trail. That's part of that $6.7 million that we have just for that trail. So it's coming. That's not to say I'm done asking you guys for funding yet.
So when
I have more projects that
at CMAR Trail, when will that go in then? The rest of that?
So ideally, we were supposed to be done with design this year. We do still have to get environmental clearance south of Highway 100, and that will allow us to pursue property negotiations with the property owner. South of Highway 100, I don't anticipate that to be a short process. That is something that it could most likely turn into design in 2019. Fingers crossed for construction 2020 to do that. That is one of those things. Once we get that environmental clearance, the bridges. We're able to sub-phase that out. So if south of Highway 100 is taking longer, we could potentially phase out the part through Thomas Park where we're able to just pave the majority of the existing trail through Thomas Park, or the bridges. We can get to work on those. It doesn't necessarily have to be an all or nothing thing. So we could see some segments a little bit quicker than that.
So question, so you said it's going to be a long extended effort to get some of that land. Who are we dealing with?
Atlas Unlimited, Terry Bjornson. We were in discussions, and then he snagged up another half mile, the rest that we needed. So we are basically solely needing him to help us with the trail easement.
Okay.
Okay, that's it for Master Trails Plan. Like I said, it's all online. Like I said, it touches a lot of the departments as well. I feel like sometimes I'm just the middleman for trails because engineering is working with the developers, working with the street cross sections. Parks is working on maintenance of it, and then Public Service is working on painting it as well. So moving on to the Safe Routes to School plan here, and this is something that has been brought up to your attention more recently, that within the plan it calls out for, let's see if I can find the trail. It calls out for a connector trail within the right-of-way of the Marion Independent School District. What it does is it kind of leaves Longfellow alone, understanding that Longfellow is north of 8th Avenue. Again, not making that the primary connection, but working with Vernon, FMI, Starry, and the high school as well. But what hasn't been talked about is all the other components that went into the Safe Routes to School plan. So this was Marion Independent High School, or Marion Independent, kind of come into the city and said, okay, how do we work on something for Marion? How do we focus on Marion Independent trails? How do we work with programs and encouraging and whatnot? And then so with the help of the MPO, so Brandon White is our multimodal transportation coordinator for the MPO, and him and Hillary Hirschner with the MPO actually did this plan. We did not hire outside consultants other than our local dues. This was done by the MPO staff. So kudos to them, big kudos to them. It took a lot of meetings sitting down with MPO staff, Chad Zrudsky with Marion Independent, Sarah Menser was Blue Zones, now Be Well Marion, Rachel Schramm with Lynn County Public Health, Tom Dobbs with Police, myself. For some meetings we did have the Iowa Bicycle Coalition there as well. But what it does is it calls out more than just the trail. If you think, I know that we've been talking about the Safe Routes to School trail and wanting to get a first phase of that completed and in to help the connectivity, but this goes a lot further, and it talks about education. What can the school do in their classrooms to help encourage kids? Is it instruction? Is it fun days? Is it what prizes can they give out, or what type of things can they do? It talks about anywhere from how do you control the speeds in front of the school? Is it traffic calming? Is it more? So is it street trees? Is it the police doing better? Not better, more enforcement in front of the schools? But that's tough because you can't say, oh, do just Marion Independent schools, because they've got Linn-Mar schools too, and it's you can't just focus only your efforts around there. So it's this give and take, but it's is it radar speed signs? Is it flashing pedestrian beacons? Is it speed tables? That those definitely slow down cars because when you hit them. It's a whole gamut of things that are listed in here that are identified that says these are the ways that you can slow people down. These are ways that you could reorient your traffic around your school to help in and out, for the safety of the kids. This is how you can encourage kids to bike to and from school. It's, as we saw with Blue Zones, walking school buses. Those are mentioned in here. So it just has this whole laundry list of things that can be done by the school, by the police, by public health, the city, as far as what we can do to increase walkability and bikeability of our students to get them into less sedentary lifestyles, make them feel safer going forward. And with each of these, so in this plan, it talks about, let's say, Starry and Marion High School's engineering objectives, so it talks about crosswalks, it talks about what the problem is, it talks about what could be done, and it talks about the responsible party. So in each one of these objectives, there is a responsible party. And we have an annual review that we sit down and we talk about, has this been done? Where are we at on this? Is it still Marion Independent that's going to be the lead on this? So this plan really calls out some of the improvements, or all of the improvements that could be done within the Marion Independent School District. Not just hard costs, but like I said, education, signage type stuff. Any questions with that?